evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Forum on the Oceanside recall election. I'm Marjorie Monroy. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of North Coast San Diego County, which is our local league which extends from Oceanside to Del Mar. And the Oceanside unit of our league has done much of the arranging for this forum tonight. League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to the encouragement of informed and active participation by all citizens in government and politics. League has chosen as its motto for this year, "Take back the system." League feels that politics should be a process for the people and not the exclusive domain of politicians, interest groups, and public relations firms. So I urge you to listen tonight to the issues, to exercise your right to have a voice in how your community is run, and vote at the recall election on October 29th. Just a few words about the format of our forum tonight. The forum will be moderated by one of our league members, Ann Pay. We will have 3 speakers. The first will be Sina Trigas, who's sitting over here in the middle. Ms. Trigas is an instructor in American history at Palomar College, and she will speak on the recall process, and she will also discuss state law as it applies to general law cities such as Oceanside. Wally Stevens, a community activist and property owner in Oceanside, will then speak for 5 minutes in favor of the recall. After that, Janet Bledsoe-Lacey will speak for 5 minutes against the recall. After that, there will be a question and answer period. The questions from the audience will be written questions only. Several league members will pass among you during the forum, and they will pass out cards on which you can write your questions. You may direct your questions to any of our 3 speakers, and then they will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. The questions will be sorted, but only to avoid duplication. So with that, I'd like to turn the forum over to our moderator, Ann Pay.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. She did not mention I live in Encinitas, so I have no vested interest in the proceedings tonight or your political process in your city. But I will be conducting the questions from the podium in the written form that you have presented to me. Our first speaker will be Ms. Trigas.
Good evening. Basically, my job up here is to just, okay. Can this be raised? All right, basically, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is the mic working? Is it working now? Okay. Okay. Alrighty. My function is to describe the process historically and also how it is operating today politically, the recall, what a general law city is, the form of government that you do have in your city. To give you a brief overview, I'd first like to talk about cities in general in California are given their powers from the state. They get their powers from the Constitution and from the legislature in our state. They are not created with, for instance, under our federal system, we have states, we have a federal government. In our Constitution, we have the state who then gives powers to cities. Cities are asked to be incorporated by the residents, by the citizens who live there, and the powers come from the state legislature or the Constitution and the statutes thereof. We have in California 3 types of cities or municipal corporations. We have the general law cities, which Oceanside is, and we have over 80% of our cities fall in that category. We have charter cities, and our larger cities tend to fall in that category. And then we have consolidated city and county, such as with San Francisco. I'm going to be very brief on what a charter city is, just so that you understand the difference. A charter city, which we are not in Oceanside I should say is not, it's a city that adopts and frames its own charter. It has a great deal of home rule. And basically, if there are provisions that have to deal with the city, municipal affairs, those provisions will prevail over state laws if there's any conflict. So there's a great deal of home rule. Now, within each charter, there will be restrictions depending on the city itself. But it has the most self-rule of the cities. General law cities, they are organized, again, from the legislature. Their law comes from the state government code, and it specifically enumerates the powers and the duties of those cities. What has happened, though, is that the legislature over the year has granted general law cities almost as much self or home rule as charter cities have. So there has been a blur as far as how much home rule you find in general law cities. They do have the disadvantage, though, as far as if the legislature wants to withdraw any of the powers that it grants to the general law cities, they can do that. So there is that difference. Again, most California cities have chosen to remain general law cities. Several of the reasons are the cost, time, and political wrangling involved in drawing up a charter. Visualize the different interests that are involved in how you're going to form a charter city, and you can understand why a good many of them, because they do have so much home rule right now with general law cities, why so many do not request to be charter cities. Because people will often say, well, you know, why aren't we all charter cities? It's a very complicated process politically, and since things are working well under general law cities, we don't feel that our power is being restricted to any great extent. We're contented to stay as general law cities. All cities, the voters elect a governing body. The governing body is a council, and the council's duty is to establish policy and to enact and implement local ordinances. In Oceanside, like in all general law cities, you have that is elected by at large. You have 5 council members, including your mayor. They are nonpartisan positions. When you elect them, you do not know what their party is on the ballot. They run as nonpartisan, and that is in the state constitution also, that they be nonpartisan. They're elected in the case of in general law cities. Most of them are elected area-wide, and if they decide to go district-wide, then they can enlarge, or vote by a district, then they can enlarge their council. In the case of Oceanside, you elect them area-wide. You do not have a representative from one area and another area, and only those people that live in that area vote for that person. Your mayor is chosen separately. Your mayor is not chosen by the council, and in some cities, that is the process, where you elect your 5-member council, and then the council members would choose who would be mayor. That is not so in this case. You do elect them separately. You have also 2 basic forms of administration in California. You have a council-manager system, which Oceanside has, and you have the mayor-council system. Within the mayor-council system, you have a weak mayor or a strong mayor system, but we're really focusing on the council-manager system right now. In there, the council provides the political leadership and makes policy. The full-time manager directs the city departments in carrying out these policies. The mayor, in this case, is directly elected, or he or she can be selected from the council. It operates mostly on a merit system as far as the administration, who is hired, who is with the heads of the department, because you have that manager system. The reason why there was this desire to have two separate bodies, in a sense, you have the council as policy and the city manager to carry it out, was initiated during the progressive movement. And we're looking now at the turn of the century, where California was one of the leading states to institute a democratic rule, get the people involved, and things such as the recall, the initiative, the referendum were put in the Constitution. The city manager concept was also part of this movement, the desire to take politics out of the administration of your government, have two separate bodies, the policy body, which is your political body, and then the managing, which is your city manager, who would be separate. And you'd have a lot of merit system type of things going on. You wouldn't find yourself constantly losing your administration every time you would have different changes in the political process. So there was this great push during the turn of the century to go into this separation of political versus administrative, or in carrying out the policies of the council. More than 3/4 of the states incorporated city in California have this type of city manager council function. The city manager is given the power to appoint and remove most of the heads of the departments. He is selected for an indefinite term. He holds his office as long as he or she enjoys the confidence of the majority of the council. If you'd visualize the system as being very similar to a corporation, where you have the voters as the stockholders, the council as a board of directors, and the city manager is the general manager. And this is what we're looking at. The role of the mayor then is one of the chairman of the board. It is not a specific executive role, but obviously the leadership style will determine very much how the mayor carries out his role and how strong the mayor or weak the mayor will be, or how strong or how weak the council will be. A lot of this depends on the personalities involved. So if you could just visualize a corporation and how it's functioned, that is very similar to what we see in this type of system. Briefly, in contrast to this, the mayor-council system, the mayor is basically one, and the mayor and the council is one where they actually do carry out the administration and not just the policy. You can have a weak mayor or a strong mayor, but what you're looking at is where the heads of the department go directly to the council and mayor. They do not go through a city manager. The actual operation of the city, in other words, is being carried out by a mayor-council. And so you're bringing in this political directly with the administration. And this is one way it operates. The mayor's powers for general law cities, or the duties of the mayor, are several. He or she is to participate as a member of the city council, preside at meetings, preserve strict order and decorum, sign warrants, be the official or ceremonial head of the city. He or she is to appoint members to boards, committees, and commissions with approval of the council. The exception to this is the appointment of the Planning Commission and Housing and Redevelopment Commissions. where state law expressly provided for the appointment by the council. And this is in the government code, the election code. It is up to the mayor and his or her discretion to decide whether to take recommendations from individual council members or to ask for recommendations from a council majority or to appoint without any council input at all. It is at his or her discretion, again, except in the cases of the Planning Commission or Housing and Redevelopment, where the council is the one, council as a whole is the one to do the appointment. However, appointments must be made in accordance with municipal and state code, and this requires that the mayor is subject to the advice and consent of the council. And so the mayor would appoint, the council in a sense has to confirm. The advice and consent of the council is involved in this process, obviously. The question then, of course, would be, what does advice and consent mean? What does the appointment powers mean? But basically what you're looking at, according to the government, the state code, the mayor appoints, the council confirms, except with Planning Commission, and it is up to the mayor to decide whether or not he or she will ask for input from the council. Oceanside is a general law city, and in general law cities we have a 5-member council. In this case, there is no limit on the number of terms a council member may serve, and the city ordinance may not limit it. It is state code that it is unlimited as far as how long a council member may serve. Recall. Now let's shift gears over to what recall means. Recall basically means that the state and local elected officials may be removed from office before the end of their terms. Federal officials may not be recalled. It was brought again under the progressive movement, and it is a tool for direct democracy. It was originally conceived in California, and today 13 states of the Union do use the recall. The state Constitution guarantees the power of the voters to remove any state or local officer from office. The law requires that a petition contain a statement of the reasons for which the recall is sought. There is no requirement for specific charges. It is in contrast to the state law on impeachment, where a misdemeanor is required, and you do not, in a recall case, have to have a reason as far as violating a particular law. The recall efforts for mayors and council members have been quite frequent in California, very infrequent for state officials. It has not at all been at all successful at the state level, but it has been used frequently at the local levels, with about half success or half defeat, depending on how you look at things. They obviously, in most cases, can be quite bitter and divisive. In some communities, it may be used to remove incompetent officials who fail to act or who act wrongly. The original intent of the progressive movement at the turn of the century was, again, for popular control and to prevent abuses, which, of course, were running rampant during the turn of the centuries, where you had a lot of graft and things of this nature. That was the original intent, basically to hold officials accountable for their actions. In other communities, recall may be used to remove competent officials who have pursued unpopular policies. And again, there is no need to show a violation of any particular law to recall. Defenders of recall, those people who defend the use of the recall, basically their position is that it's a big stick behind the door. It's the threat that keeps politicians on the straight and narrow and responsive to the will of the people. If you rely on 4 years for another election to vote somebody out, you can, a lot of damage could be done, and also the alternative of an expensive court battle is not desirable. And these are the defenders of recall. Opponents say there is no proof that officials who are subject to recall are any more responsible or capable than those incumbents who are not subject to recall. They say the procedure is used by interest groups to punish or intimidate office holders than by voters who are realistically assessing official misconduct. And then they say besides where real misconduct exists, you do have the impeachment or the court process. So those are the arguments on the use of the recall. The process of recall: a petition is filed 160 days after circulation begins. It is then submitted, the signatures are then submitted to the city clerk in this case, who verifies the signatures. In Oceanside, they have to have 15% of the registered voters at the last election for that particular office. And in this case, it was 8,388 signatures were needed. It can vary from anywhere from 12% to 25%. That is the parameters that the state allows, and Oceanside has determined the 15%. The notice of intent to file such a petition and to get signatures was first sent to the office holder and filed with the clerk. Minor changes were made to put in conformance with the code. The clerk then notified the petition circulators that it was ready. They had a deadline to hand it in of June the 17th. It was handed in on the 8th. The 30 days were needed to verify the signatures. That was done. It was reported to the council in July, and on July 24th, the council set the time of the election as October 29th. You have the format of the ballot, and this will be the last thing I'll cover. You have two questions that you must put, and the state is very specific in their code on how you word the battle in a city general law election. The first one is shall, and they mention the office holder, be recalled, removed from the office of member of the city council, and then you're given yes and no. The second spot on the ballot is if the recall prevails, shall the city council fill the vacancy or vacancies by appointment or call a special election for that purpose. Again, a yes or no. That is very specific, and it is only really cities that have it structured this way. All other localities and charter cities will have the election for the slate of officers who want to take that position on the same ballot. And there may be confusion on that. The San Diego election, that's a charter city. For general law cities, they cannot do that. They must word it this way. They must ask as a second question whether it be appointment by the council or by a special election. And that is what you have. You also must have on the ballot the reasons for the recall, and it is the option of the official being recalled to respond. But that must be placed on the ballot. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Trigas. Our first speaker will have a 5-minute presentation, Mr. Wally Stevens.
Thank you. I'm Wally Stevens, and I'm a resident of Oceanside and a private individual. Some of you might have heard that the pro-recall people have decided that I shouldn't represent them. Well, the anti-recall people don't hold an edge on that. A lot of people don't like Wally Stevens, but I do speak for myself. I'm still being sued, by the way, to encourage me to cease my actions in this recall movement. I feel it's so important that I'm willing to take that chance. Now, there are about 7 items I'd like to discuss with you, starting off with the Las Salinas Sewer Control Project. We talk about the City of Oceanside being in debt. Well, here's a good example of us being in debt. The Sewer Department wanted $8.9 million for odor control work on Las Salinas Sewer Plant. The cash was available. We know we pay enough sewer bonds to pay for that. There's a heck of a reserve there. But the city council majority decided they wanted to use that money in the general fund, and they can't use it there. They can only use the interest. So they transferred that money over, got the interest working for the general fund, and then they floated some bonds. Those bonds you and I pay for. A little over $10 million in bonds for an $8.9 million job. Where did the surplus funds go on that one? The Murray Road Bridge. Many of you were here when we voted against that bridge. That bridge was built for the benefit of Dowey homes, Sunburst homes, and all those homes that are sitting out there on Mission Avenue that are basically vacant. Melba Bishop, Ted Mariancelli, and Walter Gilbert were the three that pushed through that Murray Road Bridge non-profit corporation that everybody said doesn't cost us anything. Well, if you get down to City Hall and you look through the books, you'll find out that the idea of the bridge was $1.2 million. Well, they floated a bond for $5 million. You and I are paying for that. Then he turned right around, and here recently, as late as 3/22/91, the city authorized a payment of $389,756.47 to improve the condition of stabilizers. The bridge is only 10 years old. We hadn't had a flood in the last 10 years. We definitely hadn't had one in the last 5 years. And yet we're going to spend that kind of money. Also in the books, if you can find them, it says we spent $513.50 on rents and leases for the Murray Road Bridge last year. Try and find out where that went. All those homes in the area were Melba's babies. As a result, she was very happy to get that housing, that bridge through. Melba says that she's slow growth. Melba is slow growth. I have to give her that. If you don't contribute to Melba's campaign, you don't get permits. That's how you become slow growth in Melba's ideas. Thank you. My speaker always said you had to get him to laugh at something. So you guys, I couldn't find anything funny in here. I'm sorry. Okay. The Civic Center, our big white elephant down the hill. Everybody talks about our big white elephant and say what a terrible idea that was. Well, the bonds were floated down there, and we got a beautiful Civic Center. I know I've spent more time down there recently than anybody than I've ever thought I'd spend. I see young people walking around their families, and I see activities going. Yet, when the new council took effect, they just said, we got a good deal here. We're going to go ahead and refinance this thing. Well, they refinanced it from the note, as I read the papers, and I'm not an accountant, said the note was 27.7 million, and they increased it to 35 million. Now, again, I'm going to pay for that. You're going to pay for that. Your children and your grandchildren are going to be paying on that. We aren't getting ahead, folks. Our waste disposal, our landfills. I agree. We do need a place to put our waste right now. Melba has been a consultant for waste management since the mid-'80s, since 1984, when she was out at Fallbrook, big article in the LA Times, Melba Waste Management Consultant. Check her contributors list. You'll see in her contributors several, and I won't mention names, so I won't get sued for that, other waste management outfits that are contributing to Melba on a regular basis. Her friend has a site just east of I-15 that he would also like to use for a landfill, and I'm getting the flag. So all I'm asking you now, folks, is I have no animosity toward Melba Bishop as a person, but as a politician, I diametrically oppose her views. All I ask you to do is please vote on October 29th, vote to remove Melba from the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker speaking against the recall is Janet Bledsoe Lacey.
All right. Am I being heard? I guess so. First, I'd like to apologize for my voice. I'm recovering from a cold, so if you hear me kind of scratchy, I'm sorry for that. Now, at the outset, what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank the League of Women Voters for giving me this honored opportunity to be able to come forward and to speak on behalf of Melba Bishop and to at least give you my reasons, amongst others, as to why this recall election process is so bad for our city of Oceanside at this time. Now, when I say that it's an honor for me to have the opportunity to come here to speak on behalf of Melba Bishop, I'd like to share with you the kind of contact that I know our family has had with her through the years. Now, our family has been in Oceanside for approximately 25 or 26 years. That during that time, we've had the opportunity to work with Melba Bishop on countless different city projects that we felt were going to impact us as residents. We've always found her to be hardworking, diligent, capable, and extremely concerned with what the citizen had to say about what was going to be happening in Oceanside. Now, when I say that I've worked with Melba Bishop, please understand that I have no professional nor personal relationship with her whatsoever. The way that I came to know Melba Bishop is probably the way that many of you have come to know her, and that's by having her come and attend the neighborhood meetings that we would have so often in the Fire Mountain area of Oceanside, or see her involvement in other communities that would have their residential meetings. It was Melba Bishop, between the period of 1980 and 1984, when she was first elected to the council, that was instrumental in setting up public forums for us at that time, for the public, for residents, to help organize us so that we could learn how to effectively educate ourselves on how to interact with the city and to communicate with the city government and to become a residential power. Now, in 1980, 1981, and 2, that wasn't a very popular concept amongst some of her other council members. And so often, before the council, when we would speak, particularly on issues of slow growth, it seemed as though Melba Bishop was one of the lone voices that we could have that would represent us on the council. It was Melba Bishop who always appeared accessible, concerned, and available for those of us as residents and citizens of Oceanside who wanted to be able to talk with her about things that concerned us, about projects, about land use, about trash considerations, water, sewer, other things that were happening in our city. But then I know that the League of Women Voters did not just invite me here to share with you why I support Melba Bishop so strongly and to share with you why I'm so proud to have her as a representative on our city council. It was my understanding that one of the things that I was supposed to address was, in my opinion, why this recall process at this time is so bad for the city of Oceanside. Now, on that topic, I'd like you to consider for a minute the complete lack of logic and what seems the lack of logic as to the timing of this recall election and what seems to be a complete disregard for the adverse financial impact that this city election is going to have upon us. Now, this recall election, of course, is taking place this month. Melba Bishop's elected term will expire in November of 1992, just 11 months from now. Now, at that time, at that election 11 months from now, you and I as voters would have the right to vote Melba in or vote her out, depending upon how we felt about her as a candidate if she ran again. Now, that election wouldn't cost us a dime, but this election will cost us $115,000. Then, if we have a second election, it's my understanding that it could not take place until June of 1992, which, if that council person is elected, then that person would have just their staying it's my time. 5 more months to serve. That would cost us another $115,000. I do have more comments, but they're saying it's my time. I thank you for the opportunity.
Each person will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. If the question is for a specific person, the other one may or may not rebut if you choose, but you have 2 minutes. This question is for Mr. Stevens. Says, your speech didn't give one reason to call Melba. How about trying to substantiate at least one reason why she should be recalled as outlined on the recall petition?
Well, I didn't write the statements on the recall petition. I actually became involved after, and all the cat calls and everything, are part of the game. But a thought for you is I responded because I have a scanner and I do a lot of videotaping and photography. I responded to a call out in the rear gate area of a gentleman with a stolen vehicle. That stolen vehicle was driven by Melba's son, an adult. I agree, an adult. But in the process, there was a stolen vehicle, there were drugs, there were weapons in the vehicle. And when it came down to sentence the young gentleman, and again, he's an adult, he was given 3 years for the stolen vehicle. All the other charges disappeared. So that's one of the things that I would say in that sense. But overall, the general feeling is I just don't agree with what Melba's doing. We are now $60 million in the hole, and I have a briefcase full of documents, about 8 pages of double-sided documents that you're welcome to read. You're welcome to go down to City Hall and research and see and prove to yourselves. That's all I ask. I love this city, and I don't want it so down the river, and that's where I feel it's going. Thank you.
This question is for Mrs. Lacey. The League of Women Voters stated tonight that its goal this year is process for the people, not politicians. Initiative, referendum, and recall are the main recourses of voters in the political process. When a majority of a city council votes as a block by the dictates of one council member, isn't that a good reason to recall that member?
First of all, I'd like to say that certainly a recall process is part of our democracy, and that certainly I don't challenge the right for the public to participate in that process. But what I find so interesting about this particular recall process is they're calling it a block because we as voters in the last election elected 2 people who had the same philosophical attitudes as Melba Bishop, which now are voting many times the same on the same issues. They call that a block. What about when it was 4-1 all the time with the prior council, at which time Melba Bishop was so often the lone person to speak for what seems to have been the majority of the people of Oceanside by virtue of the people we put in the last 2 elections. It seems to me that the real target of this recall isn't Melba Bishop, but the taxpayers of Oceanside who voted in the last 2 elections, where people are now trying to remove those individuals that we put into office that we have the right to see fulfill their elected terms.
Mr. Stevens, did you wish to respond?
I'll take a minute. I can agree with her on one case, that I don't think that our only problem is the voting block that we have in present council. I think we as citizens need to stand up and clean the whole city hall out. I think we need to clean the whole country out. I really feel we need to start looking at the people we elected, look at who contributes to them, look at who supports and defends them, and then turn right around if we don't like what they're doing, fire them. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, now that the recall has split the city apart, what is going to be done to bring the people back together again?
Well, I don't think we can say it split the city apart. I think we'll find out on election day if it split the city apart or not. I think we can find out that I have talked to people I've never talked to, and I'm sure a lot of you have done the same thing. And I think that hopefully out of this recall process, that we come together and take back our communities. We stop this thing of once you're in office, you're there forever. That has to stop. My wife paid our house off. I'd like to be able to live in it the rest of my life. But all these bonds and all these new taxes that are coming out, I don't know. I'm on a fixed income like a lot of you. I got on a fixed income a little earlier than a lot of you. But we need to take our communities back, and I think that we are coming together. I'm running to people I've never spoken with, and they have the same basic idea. We may differ in who we support, but at least we want our cities back. It's just our perspectives that are different.
I was choking on my cough drop. In response to the question regarding tearing the city apart, a concern that we have with this recall process is in the event that it is successful, where does our city government lie then? What we would end up having would be 4 city council people who are likely to be completely politically polarized. Now, we're going to be absent a city council person, as I understand it, until June. Again, now this is just with Melba having 11 more months to serve. Then we would have a new city council person take office who would then serve 5 months until November of 1992 when Melba's term would expire. So we've got a 4-person city council that's split politically for a period until June. Then we get a new city council person to come aboard when likely there's got to be a training and a learning process in here. Where's our city going to go? We're going to be immobilized at a time when we need our city to move forward, when we need to have leadership, and when we need to have action taken in our city to try and solve some of the problems that we have that are the worst that I can recall in my period of time of living here in Oceanside. And that's why I believe that this recall election, with 11 months left of office, leaving our city leaders in an immobilized position, is going to tear this city apart.
This question is for Janet, also on the issue of the election itself. How much will the recall election cost the taxpayers of Oceanside? And this other one also deals with Melba wanted the election on October 29th. This is what cost. Why wasn't this elucidated?
It's my understanding that this recall election, and I think there's been a couple of estimates between 97,000 to 150,000 for this October 29th election, but I think that the most repeated one is $115,000, so that's what I'm using. Then if there is a second election, because as indicated, we have the choice on our ballots of whether or not we're going to have the recall, if the recall is successful, are we going to have that replacement either selected by our council, which I suggest is likely to be divided on most issues, much less this major one, that we then, or would you rather have the person elected? Assuming that the populace decides we want to have this person elected, that election also in June of 1992 will cost us another $115,000. So we're looking at $230,000 at a time when we have been running at a deficit of anywhere between $4 and $5 million, depending upon what you read in the paper every morning, and at a time when we're having to cut our city budget 12% across the board, when we should be increasing it 12% across the board for the fire department and for the police department and all of the other needs that we have within our city. So what we have is a $230,000 cost at a time that I'd submit is the least affordable time in the history of our city to have that kind of a cost. Also, the October 29th election doesn't have any effect on the cost, whether it was in November, which there's a certain time period from which you've got to have the election from the time that the petition apparently is filed. So whether it was on November 4th or whatever the Tuesday was in the 1st November had no financial impact at all on whether it was October 29th, 30th, 31st, or whatever Tuesday came up. That has no financial impact whatsoever. There was going to be that cost regardless.
Sure. Cost, the magic number, $115,000, $230,000. Folks, we gave that much money away when we threw away a city manager that was competent, a police chief that was competent, a city attorney that disagreed who was competent. We're still paying their salaries, you and I, and they're sitting at home. We're paying that money. We sent, what, 16 people to League of California Cities? And we haven't seen the figures on that yet. When we're so broke, we sent Melba, we sent Nancy, we sent the harbor people to Washington, D.C. Now, Nancy was supposed to go. Did Melba have to go to teach her how to do things up there or what? And then we bought Nancy's pantyhose. I mean, that was part of a good deal anyway. But the thing is, we're blowing money away. We're $60 million in bonds in the hole already since they took office. That $4.5 million, I'm sorry, folks, that don't impress me at all. $60 million seems a little bigger than $4.5 to me. And as far as for the 29th, the election, the feeling is we thought maybe everybody would forget it. It don't look that way.
Mr. Stevens, prior to the last election, Melba Bishop was constantly on the losing side of the old voting bloc. Why then do you hold her solely responsible for the cases you cited?
I empathize with her for being on the losing end of the ballot, the losing end of the vote. I really do. And I think we are the ones that are responsible for that. We put people in office who had vested interest. And I don't live in a glass house. Well, maybe I do. But, you know, I don't want to throw stones at anybody. But I'm saying go look at these people who were in office voting against Melba. Look at the way the votes are going right now. And see what their vested interests are. Like I said, I don't believe in what Melba did the last few months. I think she's hurt our city more with Don and Nancy. I think they've done irreparable damage to our city, put us further in the hole. But I don't agree that the last council was much better, I'll be honest with you. But it's time for us to take our city and our state back.
This is for Mrs. Lacey. Proponents say this recall should have nothing to do with the actions of the mayor and other council members. Why? I think it has everything to do with the misaction of several years of a 4-1 voting bloc.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a question in there, quite frankly. I'll make a comment regarding the mayor and the involvement of Sam Williamson in terms of their position in the recall. And this just comes very honestly from a personal level and not from a political level. I would have hoped that our mayor would have had the political aptitude, if nothing else, to take a position that at least had the appearance of neutrality in this election process, to not further divide the city in terms of the position of the council members as they sit. I quite frankly found it an embarrassment that our mayor not only took a position in support of the recall, because look at what's going to happen, assuming the recall does not occur, then we're left with just that much more of a divided council. But for our mayor to attend the opening of the recall headquarters and to wear a hat that if my child had worn, I would have lectured my child about sensitivity. And my kids are 11 and 13 years old, and they would not have worn the kind of hat that Mayor Bagley has worn that ended up on the front page of the newspaper, repeatedly in other newspapers, that's an embarrassment to our city. Now, as to their support within the recall process, I genuinely feel that it's inappropriate, that they ought to take a political position, at least from a parent standpoint, that's uninvolved. Thank you.
I agree with her with regard to the hat. I agree with her with regard to the cartoons that have come out not only by the pro-recall, but the anti-recall, and by the, let's call it the local paper and be nice. I think some of it has been definitely, well, to use the term disgusting, humiliating, childish, And I don't feel that we need to get down to personal levels to attack anyone. This is a political arena. It should be strictly on the issues and on the activities that affect you and I financially. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, if a city allows housing to be built on the floodplain, shouldn't those citizens have the protection of a bridge as access to their property?
I had the opportunity to drive for North County Transit, and that's been slandered through the papers too. And some of you might have lived out off of, I can't remember, Apollo Road in that area. Well, I was one of the drivers that went out and carried people from their homes because we could only run the standard transmission buses out there, and I was one of the dummies that liked to drive them. So I went out in the flood area, in the flood plain area, where our incompetent city engineers, city planners, and city council people allowed homes to be built. We've also got 1,000 people living in the riverbed. We're going to provide a camp for right near the drive-in theater. It was very interesting. I got that on videotape in September, and all of a sudden the day of the meeting, it was kind of, oh, what are you talking about? I don't remember discussing that. So it's very interesting. So you've got to, please, we need a bridge over that. We had an Arizona crossing that lasted for years. It didn't cost us $500,000 a year, $900,000 a year to put that Arizona bridge. And the Corps of Engineers or the Marines or the Seabees would rebuild the thing when it washed out. We didn't need a fancy toll bridge.
This question doesn't say who it's for. You will probably know by the question. Is the real reason that Melba Bishop opposes the Jacola project, single-family property, that she is more interested in the development of Elks Lodge property? This has been tabled for a short time. Why?
Could we get a clarification on that? I really
don't have the information.
No, I don't either.
If you need me to go to there, say
I
it.
apologize for not being smarter. Yeah, okay. I asked for that one, didn't I?
This is for Mr. Stevens. The paper says no records were kept to show what happened to money. Where do you get your information?
No records were kept.
No records were kept to show what happened to the money.
Oh, apparently that's just,
In response to your
is that the $6
comments.
million or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, $6 million were Ted Mariancelli at a council meeting toward the end of his reign as one of Melba's yes people. 1984, the council was asked, and I guess we'd have to go back to the council agendas and see. This was given to me by someone who does a lot better accounting than I do, and I've gotten information from this person before, and it's always been reliable. So I would stake myself on that line. But the $6 million is, again, a minor statement compared to $60 million we've got now. So that's about the best I can do on that one. I apologize. If that person would like more information, contact me after, and I'll get that information to them after I check with my source. Thank you.
This question is for Mrs. Lacey, and you may or may not have covered part of this. All I have heard and read as reasons for a recall do not seem relevant or based on facts. Do you see any worthwhile changes coming out of this campaign? Why or why not?
Well, first of all, I think that what has happened is that the initial charges of the recall, as recited in the ballot, have been completely ignored and forgotten by the populace, because really what has started to happen is what many times happens in a recall process, to where personalities have started to come in, that accusations start to fly, internal problems from the city regarding the city council's grouping and political alliances start to take effect and take hold, and it becomes a power play. So the recall charges themselves, I believe, have become completely ignored and become irrelevant. Not one person here tonight is going to ask, I assume, whether or not Melba Bishop, as a woman, usurps the power of the mayor, and whether or not that's enough to have us spend $230,000 to have a recall election. I hope, and I would like to think what will happen as a result of this recall election is that there will be a reaffirmation of an attitude here within Oceanside that is going to support Melba Bishop and everything that she has stood for during the time that she has been a council person in supporting we as citizens in Oceanside. She's my representative on that council. She's the one that if I had a problem, she's the one I'd go to. She's the one who's always been accessible. She's been knowledgeable. She's cared and she's been concerned for the city of Oceanside. And I would like to think that if there is an overwhelming rejection of this recall election, that hopefully it will be received by the remaining council members as an acceptance of the wishes of the voters of Oceanside so that we can go forward and get on with business.
I agree. I agree with her. Melba has done a lot of things for neighborhoods. If you call Melba, I had a house that was abandoned below me, and I couldn't get anybody to act on it. Melba got it torn down. I got to agree with that. But by the same token, when the recall started, my wife called Melba Bishop on an incident. And Melba Bishop works for you and I, no matter what our political persuasion is. And she said, go talk to your friends. My wife called Nancy Yark, and Nancy Yark hung up on her 3 times, wouldn't even talk to her. So I would hope that when this thing's all over, that each and every citizen of this Oceanside realize that each and every council member, city director, manager, employee works for you, and you have to make them work for you. And if they don't do what you feel they should be doing in your best interest, then again, we need to fire them, and that's what I'm saying we need to do here. Thank you.
Mrs. Lacey, in 1982, was there a group led by Marvin Bledsoe, Melba Bishop, Lucy Chavez, and Walt, I can't read, Gilbert, and others to recall 2 council members? And if the recall was a good idea then, why isn't it a good idea now?
First of all, yes, there was a recall election, of course, in 1982, partially led by my old man. And at that time, there were a number of other people involved. I don't have any knowledge whether or not Melba Bishop was or was not involved. I can't answer that one way or another. I've heard a number of people say so, and so I must assume it's true, but I don't have any personal knowledge. That recall election versus this recall election were quite different for a number of reasons, which, again, I don't know how much time we've got to address this. But as 1982, as I recall, there was quite a length of time left for the 2 council people who were recalled to be withdrawn from office at that time. There were a list of charges to where at the recall election, the charges is what we're focused on at that recall election, that there had been a degradation by particularly one of the council men who were there, of women that had come before him, referring them to broads as they appeared. There were a number of other charges that were listed within the recall petition that were the result of the recall. Now, in this election, as I had indicated before that question was even asked, these recall charges, nobody's even talking about them. They be signed by Mr. Babin, who nobody can find anymore, as well as, of course, there's another council person, but those have become second place. People aren't talking about what's in the recall charges now. This has become a political power play to where people are voicing their concerns about good things and bad things going on, but none of it has to do with the charges. The charges in 1982 are what the people focused on at that time, with 2 council people who had lengthy terms left within their tenure of office. Thank you.
I'll pass. Stay free.
And we have time for one last question, and just so you won't feel left out, it's
You're going to roast me on the last one. Okay.
no, it's for Mrs. Trigas.
All right, great.
It says, please, could you explain the ways a person could be appointed to a vacancy, such as by a judge in the case of a tie, as opposed to an election?
The council is the one who would do the appointment. And I don't know of anything in the state code or statute that would refer it then, if there was a tie and they couldn't break the tie, and that would refer to an outside body. There would have to, the council would have to come to an agreement, I imagine. I would have to check on that. I looked at the state code. There is nothing there that I see, so it's possible that it leaves it up to the city code, and I don't believe the city code has anything in regards to a tie. I would imagine they'd have to come to some determination. There is nothing that says if the council must determine this after the election, at the next meeting after the election. There is an immediate vacancy when that recall, if the majority of the voters vote for a recall, there is an immediate vacancy, and the council would then appoint at the next council meeting. The election, or if there was an election, it would have to be done between 88 days to 103 days. That is the period of time from the actual recall election, and that's when it would go to the voters, between that window period. The actual date of determining when that election would be held would be done by the city clerk and the city attorney, but somewhere between 88 days and 103 days do you have that window period for election. I cannot say for sure if you have a tie vote and they can't decide that meeting, they hold it to a next meeting, which I'm sure is quite legal, and they can't resolve it. I am not quite sure then what happens, and that I would be glad to check on, but from what the code says, it is done by the council. The appointment process is done by the council.
Thank you. I would like to thank the three panelists for your participation, and I would especially like to thank the audience for your conduct tonight. It was exemplary, and I do appreciate that. And the most important thing you must do is vote on October 29th. Thank you so much.